Unfortunately, I'm going to take you back from beautiful parts of California to the parts of the world where I work. And I think you're about to find out why I'm not the dinner speaker. So these are pictures from India. In fact, I thought I was going to be the only person to show a picture of a toilet here. Nice to not be the only one. This is a public toilet that you might find there in urban India. This is actually in Pune in Maharashtra state. This is in the same place, but this is a community-managed toilet. You see the outside and the inside. And I brought a colleague of mine to see these several years ago. I work at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And his comment was, well, the first one's got to be better because look at it. It doesn't cost nearly as much to build. This one's got this funny thing on the top. The capital cost is a lot higher. And I said, you know, I don't think that's the right metric to use here. Let me come back to that. Take you to rural India. This is what most people think of about rural sanitation, putting in a toilet. This is what rural sanitation, or more successful rural sanitation, looks like these days. This is a village where they've just walked through the village, and they have mapped out their houses. These little red things are houses, and then they've taken a bit of orange sand with the little red flags there. Anybody want to guess what that is? Yes, that's exactly what it is. It's where people defecate. And this is part of a process known as community-led total sanitation. And this originated about 11 years ago in a small village with a small NGO in Bangladesh. And they realized that giving away toilets wasn't working very well. But when they did this, when they engaged the village, the leaders of the village, the whole village, to talk about how they were living, you could actually get the whole village to become 100% open defecation free. So with that as background, let me give you a little bit of the big picture. This is the global sanitation crisis. There are currently 2.6 billion people who don't have access to sanitation. About half of those practice what's politely called open defecation, shitting in the outdoors. And I'm not particularly polite. Most of those, as the diagram shows, live in Asia. But the percentages, which is what you see here, with the red being less than 50% access to improved sanitation, clearly the percentages are largely in Africa. So that's where we are focusing our work. Oh, let me say one other thing about this problem. That 2.6 billion, which is from, I think, 2008, is pretty much the exact same number as it was in 1990. And there are a lot of people working on this problem. So they have not made much progress. The consequences of this are profound. Bad water, sanitation, hygiene are killing 1.5 million kids under 5 every year. And there are lots of other bad consequences from this, but that is the most profound. A friend of mine said, you need to explain this the way you did to me, so I'll explain it the way I explained it to him. The problem with the sanitation challenge is you can't give toilets away. I mean, you can give toilets away, but it doesn't solve the problem. People have been doing that for decades, actually even longer than that. And why does that not work? Because convincing a poor family that they need to stop defecating in the open and start using a toilet is not about giving them a toilet. It involves a lot of other things that need to change, some of which are, interestingly, challenges that were mentioned by earlier speakers today. First of all, and I've compared it here to one of the major areas of the foundation, which is vaccines. This person is getting a shot. Why is a toilet different from a vaccine? A toilet is different from a vaccine because a vaccine is a one-shot deal, or maybe annually. A toilet has to work forever. Big, big, big challenge. A vaccine, once you inject the person, doesn't require any maintenance. A toilet, you have to keep it running. A vaccine is administered by a health worker. A toilet has to be maintained by the household, or in the case of urban areas, by a group of people or somebody paid to do it. Getting a vaccine requires very minimal behavior change. Not that there are parts of the world where that's not hard, but the behavior change required to get people to use a toilet is quite profound. They really have to change the way they work. And vaccines, finally, are identified with better health. Toilets are identified with one of the most taboo topics out there, which is shit. It's true. This is a topic that's taboo in almost every culture. Now, that's the big picture of why I care about sanitation. The reason I care about sanitation is that that's what I do for a living. About 7 years ago now, I met a guy who worked at a place I'd never heard of, which is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And he invited me to Seattle. I was working in Washington, D.C. at the time. He invited me out there to give a presentation on what I had learned over the previous 10 years, which was how to use the private sector to deliver social value in the developing world. And it became apparent to me during that trip, which was about a half a day, that he had another motive, because by the time lunch was done, he had offered me a job. The foundation at that point was thinking of moving out of the global health area, well, moving in addition to the global health area into global development. And they were looking for people who might be able to take on some major challenges. And it was a very interesting conversation, because he said, we're going to take on some really big challenges, and we're going to let you pretty much do what you want to do. And the opportunity to have those sorts of resources with the flexibility just does not exist anywhere else in the world. So I've been doing that for the last 6.5 years, and the rest of the talk is going to be about what I've learned. So the first part is, there are 10 of these. Think of it as the top 10 list of learning how to work at very large scale. The first of these is you really have to diagnose the problem. And when I say diagnose, I mean really thoroughly understand it. People will come up to you and say, it's all about giving away toilets. And it's like, well, no, I really don't think it's all about giving away toilets. Toilets are certainly a part of it, but there are other. Now, is that 1 minute for my 3, or am I? Wow. I'm going to go through these quickly. Okay. Diagnosing the problem, three different ways of doing it. We knew about the 2.6. I talked about that earlier. We realized that was only part of the problem. These are people who don't get their sanitation contained. These are people who get it contained but can't do anything with it. It goes into a pit. There are almost 7 billion people in the world. Anybody have an idea of how many people actually have a flush toilet? What percentage of that? It's about 1/3. So 2/3 of the people in the world do not have access to a flush toilet. So it's not just the toilet, it's what to do with it. This rather strange-looking diagram is a picture of the main players in this business, from the households all the way up to funders, including service providers and policymakers. You need to have this picture if you're going to try to make a difference. You need to think about it. Finally, it's about the people, not just about the hardware. Some of you may be familiar with an article from the Stanford Social Innovation Review, which talked about the difference between adaptive problems and technical problems. It comes from a professor at Kennedy School, Ron Heifetz, and a couple of other people. This is very much an adaptive problem. Okay, second part, define success clearly. I define success here in 3 ways. It had to have impact, which meant it made people healthier. It had to be sustainable, which meant it kept going. And it had to work at scale, because if it didn't work at scale, you don't really have much of a chance to solve the problem. The challenge isn't each one of those. The challenge is reaching all 3 of them at the same time. So back to the urban sanitation situation. My colleague was looking at the capital cost, and he was absolutely right. The public toilets are a lot cheaper than the community toilets. But I came up with a new metric after a little thinking, and my metric was life cycle cost per actual use. And the reason I came up with that metric was because if the toilet's not used, it's not having any impact. If you don't take into account the life cycle cost, you're not thinking about sustainability. And I knew these things were working at scale because they were serving about 500,000 people in the city. On that basis, instead of the public toilets being cheaper, they're about 4 or 5 times more expensive. So again, you've got to define what the metrics are. Yes. Next point. If you're going to define those metrics, you have to encourage the people you're giving money to actually use them. Interestingly, this is a sector where there hasn't been that much measurement. The point on determine what works and what doesn't, it is amazing. Well, it's not that amazing. It's very hard to do water and sanitation work in the developing world. It's extraordinarily difficult work. Money is scarce. People go out and do it. But they don't measure what they're doing. They don't actually think that much. They do think about it, but they're not trying to improve on it. So one of the advantages that a foundation like ours has is we can measure what impact is, and we can measure what types of mechanisms are actually working. Quick point on promoting better decision making. You think back to that funny diagram I had with all the ovals and the different parts. The idea, if you want to work at change, is not to give people things, but to get each part of that system making the right decision. You don't want to make decisions for them. You want to encourage them to make the right decisions. That is a lot about the issues of motivations for households and incentives for institutions. If you start thinking about those sorts of things, you can make a difference. Quickly on changing the debate, what this means is we don't want people out there saying it's about giving away toilets. We don't want people out there saying it's about coverage. We want them talking about something called sustainable service delivery, which is the way you're actually going to get the problem solved in the long term. Working at scale, work at scale, don't scale up. What this means is there are thousands, tens of thousands of pilots in the development business. Some of them are successful. A very few of them go to scale. I had a hypothesis, which is it's not about scaling up the pilots. It's actually going out and doing things at scale. So we have funded projects at the scale of hundreds of thousands or millions of people on the grounds that it's not about scaling up. It's about learning how to do it at scale and then replicating it. A very different concept. I am in the privileged position to have the resources to try something like that. Most people don't. Think outside the water closet. We are, after all, the Gates Foundation. As I mentioned, the water closet, which is an 18th century technology, is only serving about a third of humanity at this point. We have launched an effort to come up with a new way of dealing with human waste. We've just started it. We've seeded lots of little investments at this point, but we would like to find a different way of dealing with that. Last 2 points. You have to expect to learn. Too often when you're out there working, people are just trying to get the job done. And if they're not thinking that they should learn and they're not thinking that way, they aren't going to be able to come back to you and say, we made a mistake, we want to try something different. So we try to promote that among our grantees. And finally, what I probably should have started with is that you have to listen to the poor. And that can be extremely difficult from where I am now. I spend a fair amount of time in the developing world. I've spent time in places such as the one the second speaker talked about, dealing with the Dalit in India. And that capacity to listen to the poor is not just for the foundation, but it's very much for the people we fund. So Chris is giving me the sign. That's it. I will leave you with one positive sign from all of this. These are a bunch of headlines from India. And one of the results from that community-based sanitation is that families are not letting their girls marry into households where there isn't a toilet. When we get to that point, I think we will have solved the problem. Thank you.